The next PS5 is 100% confirmed. Sony just fixed a lot of your games and you didn't even notice. And there's a big PS5 update that you're gonna wanna see. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the midweek news update. I've got a ton of awesome stories to talk about today, but before I do, help me out and subscribe to the channel and set your notifications to all. I'm sitting at like 150,000 subs right now. I would love to get to 200,000 as fast as possible because, I don't know, it's just like a better number than 151. I don't know. Help me out. We have more evidence that there will be a showcase this month because the marketing for Spider-Man 2 has officially started ramping up. And we actually got some pretty good updates. So the first thing is that on Free Comic Book Day, we're going to be able to get a comic that has an original story from the Gamerverse, as they're calling it, of this Spider-Man universe. It's going to be a new story with a new villain. I think it's the Hood, which is pretty cool, and it'll lead in to Spider-Man 2. Sorry, my fan's spinning up. And then the more interesting update here on the Spider-Man marketing is that Sony is finally letting us buy the standalone version of Spider-Man Remastered. If you remember way back when the PS5 came out and we got Spider-Man Miles Morales, the Ultimate Edition of that game came along with Spider-Man Remastered, which was just putting all of the texture and effects and FPS updates that Miles Morales got into the original Spider-Man game. But the weird thing was, whether you own the game on PS4 or not, you couldn't upgrade or buy the game standalone. The only way to get it for the longest time was to just buy the Ultimate Edition of Miles Morales, which really sucked because a lot of people just kind of wanted that remastered version of Spider-Man because, at least in my opinion, the original Spider-Man is a lot better than Miles Morales' game. Thankfully, better late than never, Sony is finally giving us the ability to purchase Spider-Man Remastered, but also upgrade from older versions of the game. So if you were one of those people who wanted to play Miles Morales and you held strong and said, no, I'm not going to buy the Ultimate Edition of this game, I'm just going to buy the cheaper version and hope that eventually Sony lets me upgrade my original version of the game that I bought for $60, you are being rewarded today. So the cool thing is, if you have any version of the PS4 game, whether it's the regular launch edition, the one that comes with all the DLC, or the Game of the Year edition that came later, you are able to just upgrade to the remastered version for $10, which is a really good deal because I'm pretty sure the remastered version comes along with all the DLC. So if you never played any of the 3 DLC packs that came out, I think it was called the City That Never Sleeps bundle over on Spider-Man PS4, now you'll be able to get all of that for free, and it basically makes up its own full expansion. It's like they took a real expansion and split it up into 3 parts. It's definitely not as good as the main story, in my opinion. It feels like a standalone thing that doesn't really advance the main plot in any way, but that version of Spider-Man is just so awesome that getting more lore around him because of all the big changes it makes to what we already know about Spider-Man is just cool and totally worth playing through. I think you could get through it in like a weekend. Unfortunately, if you got the game on PS Plus though, you can't upgrade that to the remastered version. You'll just have to buy it standalone, which is going to cost you $50 if you just want to buy the game outright, which in my opinion, pretty egregious pricing, especially for how old this game is. And the patch that made it remastered was more of like a patch. It wasn't really a full pass on the entire game. All it was like a 60 FPS patch. It made the textures look a little bit better. And then when the PC version came out and it got even more upgrades over the PS5 version, they didn't retroactively add that stuff back into the PS5 version. So the thing that I would do here personally is just go to GameStop, go to your local game store if you've got one where people sell used games, or check eBay or something like that and do your best to get a $10 copy of the PS4 version because they go pretty cheap now. And then when you get that in, just pay the $10 to upgrade it to the remastered version. Do not go out and buy this for a full $50, especially with how old the game is. Like, the sequel is about to come out. So Sony, I think you should lower the price a little bit to at least like $30 or maybe even $20.
Hey. Thanks for buying a Sony Maximum television product.
Next up, if you guys remember, there was an update for the PS5 a couple weeks back that had the classic Sony line where it's like, I don't know, it improves performance across the board for the console or something like that. They're not really specific about what it improves. They also said that the DualSense Edge got a firmware update, and I have noticed that the battery life has been a little bit better since that firmware update on my DualSense Edge, which is awesome, but we finally know one of the features that was improved on the PS5, and it's a really good one. some games, when you play PS4 games on your PS5, whether they have a 60 FPS update or not, they had a rendering issue where the textures on the ground would be super grainy and blocky and blurry, and they wouldn't totally load in. Shadow of the Colossus is the one example people really talk about all the time, and that makes sense to me because this is a game that's been available on PS Plus for a long time. It's also a game that you can pretty much blow through in a day or two, so people kind of go back to it, especially since they're so nostalgic, and they've noticed that whether you're playing the game on PS5 or PS4 Pro, there was a rendering issue on the PS5 version. In the Push Square article I originally found this story in, there's a great screenshot that shows the issue. Like on the left side, you can see the super blocky, rough texture on the ground underneath the main character. I forgot his name. And then on the right side of the screen, you can see it loaded in super high resolution with all of the grass there and everything else that's supposed to be there. There's also some more images in the Reddit post where this was found. I'm honestly curious why Sony didn't advertise this. Maybe they just don't want to acknowledge that the PS4 backwards compatibility had any issues at all in the first place, because then people will kind of scrutinize their old PS4 games even more. One game I'd really like them to go back and fix though is Bloodborne. I don't know if you guys have played this game recently on the PS5, but even with that better hardware and the fact that it's running these games theoretically better, that game's frame pacing is terrible. It regularly drops frames, the resolution is super low, and if Sony's not going to go back and remake Bloodborne, I think the very least they could do is get From Software to just give them the source code, and then they could say, hey, Bluepoint, you guys worked on Demon Souls, you know the franchise, you know what's going on here, can you just clean up, like give us some sort of patch for Bloodborne and we can release it for free to make people happy that bought a PlayStation 5? I know this is a crazy concept for Sony, right? Like just doing something out of the kindness of their heart because the fans are asking for it, but I think it would really go a long way with fan goodwill.
Great things happen when you tune in to Sony Maximum Television.
Our good friend Tom Henderson over at Insider Gaming has an update on the PS5 Pro. He said that this thing is 100% confirmed. It's coming by the end of 2024. He also weirdly says it could get canceled if it doesn't work out, but dev kits are going to be going out to developers very soon, so they have a reference point of what they'll be able to push performance-wise with their games when it comes to the PS5 Pro. The article at Insider Gaming specifically says they can't report any specifics at this time, but they understand that the first dev kit prototypes will be going to first-party developers within the next couple of months. The third-party developers receiving them by the end of the year as well. So as far as I'm concerned, this is like all the proof I need that the PS5 Pro is real. And honestly, I'm not super surprised about this because I've mentioned this before, but Sony has really been going for a more like broad appeal with the PS5 this generation. Obviously with stuff like The Last of Us TV show, this Gran Turismo movie, the fact that they're going to places like Wired to show off PlayStation hardware versus going to IGN or GameSpot or any like YouTubers like me shows that they want this thing to be looked at more as like an iPhone or a MacBook or something that you buy and upgrade over time versus something like a gaming console like a Nintendo Switch. And it really does seem to be working for them because we just talked about that news story last week where the PS5 has passed the PS4, which is kind of crazy considering how this thing was so hard to get for the first 2 years of its life cycle. It's a good sign overall for gaming though that people really want to pick up PS5s because all we hear about over and over again is that gaming is collapsing and all that, but it's clearly not. The only issue Sony is really having, like I mentioned, is that people don't want to spend $70 on games. But I think the biggest reason for that really is that they haven't had a lot of heavy hitters that are PS5 only. I mean, the biggest game they've released this generation is definitely God of War Ragnarok, and you could go buy that on PS4. And this is anecdotal data, but when I was watching TikToks of the game and stuff, I noticed that almost every time, like 9 out of 10 TikToks I saw with God of War cutscenes in them, they were running on a PlayStation 4. And when you would get tips on getting good armor or fighting bosses, it was always at 30 FPS, which again basically lets you know that it was on PS4. And right about now is when we're seeing Sony move on from the PlayStation 4. Jedi Survivor is PS5 only. I'm sure Sony was like, hey, Respawn, really showcase the PS5 with this game. We got Burning Shores, the expansion for Horizon. That's PS5 only. I don't really want to count Gotham Knights since the only reason that's PS5 only is because they didn't finish it. Dead Space Remake was PS5 only, and I want to say that game could run on PS4, but I feel like the issues with the HDD that you get on PC where like when you start it up, if you're not using an SSD, the game says, hey, you need to use an SSD with this game or it's just straight up not going to work. That lets you know that kind of maybe that game did need a PS5. I think the biggest reason for that would be that the ship is one big open map now versus being interconnected levels. So yeah, I think that as more games are PS5 only, people will be forced to spend $70, but still there's going to be that group of people out there who have PS Plus Extra and Premium and they only want to play games through that. As far as the PS5 Pro goes, I really need to know what benefit we're going to get out of this machine. That's another unintended consequence of the PS4 straddle generation continuing on for so long. People have been trained now to expect 60 FPS out of their games. You've seen it with the outcry with Jedi Survivor. So now Sony's kind of between a rock and a hard place, right? Like they can't say buy the PS5 Pro if you want to continue playing games at 60 FPS because they've set the precedent of 60 FPS on the regular PlayStation 5. So that basically eliminates one big option as to what we could expect on the PS5 Pro. What I really hope for is less games to use AMD's FSR. I think the technology is good there, right? Like the idea of running a game at a lower resolution and then applying a filter to it to make it look like it's running at 4K, it's cool. It's just when you take FSR and compare it to what DLSS does, which is like use AI to upscale the game, it's night and day, completely different. DLSS is borderline better looking in a lot of games than even running games natively, which is kind of crazy, especially with the frame generation that they're using AI to do on DLSS 3, which I can't even take advantage of because I don't have a 4090. So when you look at that and compare it to FSR, which has tons of ghosting, which you can see stuff running at a lower resolution, it adds a lot of jagged edges. I just hope with the PS5 Pro they either stop relying on that so much or they make it run at a higher quality mode. Next up, Neil Blomkamp's trailer for the Gran Turismo movie, because like against all odds, I kind of want to say it looks really good. I know The Last of Us just came out. I know it was a really good show. I enjoyed it just like the rest of us, but like, I don't know. I just kind of feel like we got to treat that as a fluke until we have more evidence that video game movies and TV shows, especially from Sony, can live up to the legacy of their games. I mean, we like a week ago, we just got that Twisted Metal trailer that looks terrible, but this Gran Turismo movie looks awesome, and the rumored plot turned out to be true, which is that it's about a tournament in Gran Turismo that like a kid who's really good at Gran Turismo partakes in and then wins, and then he becomes a real racer for the Nissan team. They say Nissan in the trailer. I'm going to say Nissan because I'm in America and that's how we say it here. I knew this movie was going to look good because I've been a fan of Neil Blomkamp for a while. This dude, he has had so many great opportunities to make awesome movies that I was really excited for. Sigourney Weaver talks about all the time this Alien movie that they were working on that would bring back Ripley. That didn't happen, and she's basically saying that because that movie never came out, her ship has sailed in the Alien franchise. And then he was also up to do a RoboCop sequel. It was going to be like a sequel that they didn't make because there was a writer's strike or a lawsuit or something like that. It was like a lost RoboCop sequel that was a direct sequel to the first one. It sounded so cool, and apparently he's off the project. So basically what I'm saying is it's kind of a miracle that we got a trailer for one of his movies, but this one does look really cool, and I think there is an opportunity here, especially with how heavily the PS5 and Gran Turismo the game are integrated into this movie, to get people excited to play more PlayStation games and play Gran Turismo. Let me look up the release date. Now, surprisingly, this movie is right around the corner. It's coming out on August 11th. I'm excited for it. I am more excited, though, just being real, for Chad Stahelski's Ghost of Tsushima movie, especially after seeing John Wick 4. That's easily my favorite movie of the year. Not like there's been that much competition this year for John Wick 4, in my opinion, at least. Guardians of the Galaxy, please be good. Next up, Jedi Survivor's been out for about a week now. It's not running great. If you saw the Digital Foundry video, you can kind of see that it's upscaling from like 800 and something p. It's using FSR2, which is AMD's version of DLSS, and it just doesn't really look all that good, especially in motion. You get a lot of blurring and stuff like that. And of course, when the game came out, EA was promising a bunch of updates over a period of weeks. So I'm doing the Dead Space thing. I'm waiting until a few things are ironed out, and then I'm really going to dig into this game. But I finished Coruscant. I got past the boss fight there on Jedi Grandmaster, which was actually pretty difficult and made more difficult by this game's frame rate going from like 30 to 60 all over the place. And then I had the timing down for the higher frame rate, I switched back to 30 FPS mode and I had to relearn it, but I did beat the boss on Coruscant, and then I was like, yeah, I need to wait for a smoothed out frame rate here. We did just get a patch for the game. I figured I'd let you know what it does. I checked it out. It doesn't really do all that much, in my opinion, to make the game run any better, but there are some fixes that come along with it that I think people are going to want to know about. So the first thing it claims to fix is crashing, which is good because this game hard crashed for me on Coruscant 3 times in a span of like 4 hours, which I would consider pretty close to unacceptable. I mean, games crashing at all is pretty bad, especially when it's a Souls-like game where you have to like go to a point to save your progress and make sure you bank your skill points. You can actually lose skill points from a game crashing, so anything they're doing to fix those crashes is good. Oh, and they also specifically say they fixed crashes from skipping cutscenes. Like, great, that's good to know because a lot of people are skipping cutscenes in games these days. So yeah, your game shouldn't crash anymore. They fixed an issue with enemy AI remaining in T-pose during photo mode. I've actually seen that one, and they should add T-pose to the poses section for enemies because now it's kind of like a meme. They fixed an issue where players were getting stuck inside the chamber of duality if they didn't save after leaving the chamber and then die. That's crazy. That's borderline game breaking, right? Like what it's saying there is if you're in the chamber and then you leave and you don't save, if you die, you'll get warped back to the chamber, and then because you're not in the activity you were doing when you were last in there, you have no way to get out. I saw that one coming up a couple times on Twitter. I didn't really understand what was happening, but it's good that they fixed that issue because, like I said, that's game breaking. This definitely seems like a situation though where the performance issues, people are just kind of looking past them because they like playing the game so much and it's such a good game, which obviously is what EA was kind of banking on by releasing it knowing it was this unfinished. So they kind of got what they wanted, it seems, because the game obviously is doing super well in the sales charts. But I don't know, I hope in the future they see the backlash for both this and Redfall and we start getting pushed release dates a little bit farther. Or the director, who I saw a news story going around about, said that he had an opportunity to delay the game again past the last delay and he chose not to. Maybe next time they make a Jedi game or even a Star Wars game, he'll take that extra delay he's offered to make sure the performance issues are ironed out, because when that becomes the conversation, it takes away from all the cool stuff that happens in the game and all of the great graphical effects and even new hardware that's being taken advantage of with ray tracing and stuff like that. All of that conversation is evaporated when all people care about is performance issues. So even though a lot of people are looking past them, having the conversation be there at all kind of sucks. It makes you remember that in the future versus the amazing time you had playing one of the best Star Wars games ever.